they give you a 3, 2. Okay, here we go.
All right,
great. We are on air on Google Hangouts. I'm Bonnie Urbay, host of PBS's To the Contrary, and with me is Asra Nomani, who has just re-released her book, Standing Alone, which is really sort of your personal journey through Islam as a Muslim woman and reconciling with your religion in a way that you feel that Islam treats women fairly. But when you started out, did you believe that Islam was fair to women?
Well, when I started out, it was the winter of 2003. I had just had my son Shibli, and I was a criminal according to the Islamic laws of Pakistan and virtually every other Muslim majority country in the world. And I had a question mark in my mind about whether Islam treated women fairly. So I ironically went to the birthplace of Islam, the country of Saudi Arabia. And there I realized that back in the 7th century, women had it actually a lot better than women have it today in many of our Muslim communities. And I came back with this manifesto in my mind about how we needed to go back to the progressive ideas of Islam at its birth and go back in order to move forward in the 21st century.
How was Islam, in your mind, better to women, 1,300 years ago than it is today? Why is that?
Yeah, what I say really carefully is that there was a progressive spirit about the faith at that time, because the basic fundamentals was not equal. Women were not given inheritance rights before Islam was brought into that area of the Middle East, modern day Middle East. And then they got inheritance, but they didn't get equal inheritance to their brothers because there is the patriarchal lineage that assumed that the husband would take care of the wife forever. And so now in the 21st century, what I believe is that we need to go back to that progressive idea, but we need to make everything equal. And so there's other ways where, women went into the mosque in Medina without any separation. There was no back door or basement door or balcony that they had to go to. But now 2 out of 3 mosques in America put women in these separate areas, segregated by everything from shower curtains to cubicle walls. I even ended up at one in which we were literally in a closet. And so it's just unbelievable that today we aren't more forward than we should be, than we could be, and I think we should be.
Now, you had your son in Pakistan, and you were not married at the time, right?
Yeah, I became pregnant in Pakistan, and then I came to my home state of West Virginia to actually give birth.
How far along were you before you left Pakistan?
I was about a month pregnant at the time. I had just discovered that I was pregnant, and it was in the midst of this great tragedy of my friend Danny Pearl's kidnapping, and I had discovered that I was pregnant just 1 week before we discovered that Danny had been murdered. And so, unbeknownst to me, I was pregnant the day that Danny had departed for the interview, from which he didn't come back. It took me some weeks to realize it, and then we got on a plane shortly afterwards and got out of Pakistan.
And at the same time, your fiance, you were planning to marry your son's father, but he disappeared, correct?
He did. He was afraid by the cultural norms of Pakistan, but both in bringing this baby into the world, and then also Pakistani intelligence had already knocked on his door because of Danny's kidnapping, and any woman around the world, I scrambled, through the pregnancy to try to make this relationship work, but it never came to be. And when I gave birth to my son in West Virginia, I had this moment when I was literally sneaking a call to my boyfriend, my fiance. And my mother, of course, was a typical mother, and she was just like, this is bad news, just move on with your life. So I accidentally dialed 911 because the country code for Pakistan is 92 and the city code is 21. and I accidentally dialed 911. My baby was just, little baby next to me. I was nursing him, and I heard the answer, and there was a West Virginia state dispatch and state police dispatcher, and she's like, 911, how can I help you? And I hung up the phone. So she did what dispatchers do, and she called me back, and she said, is there a gun to your head? And there, in the darkness, with my little baby beside me, I realized there was a gun to my head, and it was my own gun, and I had a gun to my own head, and I was sabotaging my own life and my little baby's life in pursuit of this relationship that wasn't going to happen. And so from that moment, I was free, and I thank that dispatcher to this day.
Okay, but let's get back to so you're in the United States, you're a U.S. citizen, your child is born here. What did that do to your relationship with Islam?
I had a really troubled relationship with my faith at the time. It was in the name of my religion that the men had killed my friend, Danny Pearl. It was in the name of my religion that these clerics across the world thought that a pregnant woman without a wedding ring is a criminal. And so I really wondered whether I could find peace in my faith. And that was the journey to Saudi Arabia and Mecca for me. It was really a journey to see whether I could find reconciliation for the person who I am with the faith to which I was born.
And how did you do that?
Well, there I went. I went with my mother, who, again, didn't really go for the pilgrimage. She went because her daughter was taking her newborn grandson to Saudi Arabia, where there were going to be millions of people, millions of germs, and on top of it, I was a criminal according to the laws of Saudi Arabia. My father was there, my niece and nephew went. And
were you all risking your lives in some sense by going there?
If you ask my friends, they thought that I was. If you ask my mother, she thought that I was. I believed that ultimately that blue passport that we've got as American citizens would protect us. And, we were like all pilgrims on a tour of, you sign up for a tour. Ours was the quote 5-star tour, where you end up staying at the Mecca Sheraton, and you sleep across the street from a Kentucky Fried Chicken, and there's a mall right next door to you. And so I was afraid. I will be honest that I wasn't sure what would happen. And, my mother too is a woman who is a person of great common sense. There was a moment at the airport when we landed when she just, needed to get some air in her hair, and she took off her headscarf, and my nephew was like, Grandma, put your scarf back on, because over there you show one strand of your hair and you fear for your life. And there was another moment when my nephew gets hungry and my dad's nowhere to be seen. He's the male chaperone to my mother and me, but her grandson is hungry. So my mother goes dutifully across the street to the Kentucky Fried Chicken without any, male chaperone, and orders the dinner to go, of course, and comes back to the Sheraton where her grandson enjoyed it. But, so there I went, and I was just shocked because I walked into this place that's sort of like Disneyland. There's marble floors, and, Bonnie, you would never be able to go there because there's this sign as soon as you enter into the area for Mecca that says non-Muslims, and it's a sign for the exit ramp. And I was so offended by that because I've benefited from going on the Hindu pilgrimage, Buddhist pilgrimage, the Catholic pilgrimage in Rome, went on Jewish pilgrimage in Jerusalem, and it's just not right. I've been to Bethlehem. You learn so much by doing the pilgrimages of other people. And so when I went there, though, I was just shocked at the glitter, right? There's just bling everywhere. There's chandeliers and marble floors. I was hoping to walk in the sand of Mecca, but instead we went to the top floor of the 3-story mosque that sits there around the black cube that's the Kaaba. And I walked then with my little baby, Shibli, in a baby Bjorn carrier, in the footsteps of Hajar, the symbolic mother of Islam, who was cast into the desert when Sarah supposedly felt a rivalry with her and Abraham sent her away. And there I, was just shocked at how powerful the experience was for me as a woman, of this woman from thousands of years ago, standing alone with her little baby, running desperately, searching for water, and we as Muslims run in her footsteps. Only as a woman, my Saudi prayer book said that I couldn't run. It was too titillating for men to see women run, and so we could only walk briskly. And that's when I realized that this incredible power that all of us have inherited from all of the symbolic women in our cultures and faiths and societies, in our families, just becomes distorted when it gets interpreted through the voices of men usually. And that's when I really realized how far afield the faith had gone from its roots, and how it was incumbent on all of us to stand up for the progressive ideas that I believed in.
Do you find, in your book, do you talk about finding support for that in the United States?
Yeah, I did. I ended up finding support among young Muslim women and older Muslim women, just like myself, who have felt that disconnect, have not felt that the institutions and the organizations and the national leaders that we've got in our Muslim countries, express our frustrations. And, we had this great moment a couple of years after I came back from the pilgrimage, and we called it a March of the Daughters of Hajar. And so we went from the one of the highest points in Morgantown, West Virginia, my hometown, as women, and we walked around the corner from the McDonald's through the front doors of my mosque in Morgantown that had otherwise been forbidden to us. And it was beautiful. There was a woman of African American descent, Syrian descent, Indian descent, and my mother was there again. And guess who else? My father. He walked behind us and he stood with us. And that was just really beautiful.
So tell me how your book concludes.
My book concludes as a call to action. And Bonnie, the book came out in 2005. But it is as relevant today, and I would argue it's even more relevant today, because we're still needing to wake up to the reality of this issue of ideological problems within Islam. And there's, a reluctance by many fellow liberals and progressives to actually take on the issues within the Islamic faith for fear of offending Muslims. And so in 2005, I called upon my fellow moderates in society to stand up against extremism of all kinds in all of our communities, and for us to stand together. And to me, that's even more relevant this year in 2016. It's almost frightening how much we are living still with blinders on our eyes. I cannot believe that the journey has been so many years, and yet we're still struggling to educate people. But I understand that that's just the way it is, and that's how it is. And so the book ends as a real clarion call to all people. And I do end with the symbolic moment where I take 99 precepts that I've written using the names of God in Islam, and I post them to the front door of my mosque in Morgantown as a symbol of our need for reform, and that reform is as much needed today as it was back then.
And you have a fairly large social media following. So what has been the response of American Muslims to your call, your clarion call?
Well, we have a lot of American Muslims who are so ready and willing to take on this important, mandate. There's a lot of people who are afraid. I can't tell you, for all of the folks who follow me, there are direct messages that I get from so many Muslims who say they are afraid to follow me publicly because they are afraid of becoming berated by other Muslims. Because if you follow any of my timelines, you'll see that the greatest attacks that I get are from our fellow Muslims. They are ugly oftentimes and just vicious. And, I understand that this is a battle for the soul of Islam, just like the subtitle for my book says. And yet I have to admit, Bonnie, that, it does sadden me, because I know that all of us are motivated with a hope for a better world. And I never believe that people need to destroy each other as they're trying to do that. But what I'm really excited about is the fact that so many years later, we've come together, many of us here in the West and Europe and around the world, with an organization and an effort that we're calling the Muslim Reform Movement. And in this Muslim Reform Movement, we're stepping forward with these very simple ideas for peace, human rights, and secular governance. And that's what I really believe is the way forward for us as a community. After all of these years of struggle and real challenge, I realized that, as long as we have governance that merges religion with politics, we're going to have trouble. The West has learned this a long time ago, and I really do believe that there's so many more Muslims who are recognizing that. One of the biggest movements, Bonnie, is an ex-Muslims movement, because the institutions have so disappointed many young Muslims that they are now leaving the faith. And from Saudi Arabia to the U.S., leaders are realizing that they are not serving the cause of Islam either, because they are simply staying back in old regressive thinking that's not moving us forward.
Well, thank you very much for your time, and I suggest to all people watching that they read your book. It is fascinating, and Godspeed to you in your what you're trying to do with your faith.
Thank you so much. And I will just explain real quickly that my napping dog behind me is one of my symbolic acts of reform, because many of the schools of jurisprudence say that we cannot have a dog in our home. And I also, in the Muslim Reform Movement, reject that that fatwa and say that our dog is our lovely pet and a friend of the family.
Yeah, a member of the family.
Yes.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. This was great, and we will see you on the show in the future.
All right, great. Thank you, Bonnie.
Thanks, Asra. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.